When it comes to the subject of UFOs, it's not only the general public at large that have seen or have been interested in them, but presidents, senators, generals, and other world leaders have interest in or involvement with UFOs. Use your mouse and the menu above to make your selections. During a visit to Ireland in 1996, President Clinton responded publicly to a letter from a 13-year-old boy from Belfast named Ryan, who had asked the president about the Roswell incident. Clinton said, quote, "Now Ryan, if you're out there in the crowd tonight, here's the answer to your question. No, as far as I know, an alien spacecraft did not crash in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. And Ryan, if the United States Air Force did recover alien bodies, they didn't tell me about it either, and I want to know," unquote. Former President Ronald Reagan made major statements on UFOs on over 18 different occasions while still in office, including an address to the United Nations.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
When Reagan was the governor of California, he admits to having seen a UFO. He and his wife Nancy and several other witnesses were aboard the governor's plane, and they all saw the object and described it as a green, glowing UFO. They chased it for over 300 miles before it flew out of the plane's range. In October 1969, while governor of Georgia, former President Jimmy Carter reported a UFO sighting. This is a copy of his UFO report and what he had to say about it. And as a presidential candidate in 1976, he pledged, "If I become president, I will make every piece of information this country has about UFOs available to the public and to the scientists." Surprisingly, once in office, Carter refused to say another word about UFOs publicly. President Carter was briefed on the UFO matter, and according to conversations I have had with a reliable source who was present at this meeting, Carter left the meeting with tears in his eyes. 1966 was the year of the Michigan wave of sightings and the famous swamp gas furor. Former President Gerald Ford was the House Minority Leader at that time and a representative of a neighboring district in Michigan. He successfully called for a full congressional investigation of UFOs. The first closed-door congressional hearings began on April 5, 1966. Unfortunately, the hearings would lead nowhere. The hearings concluded that a major university should be chosen to research the UFO phenomenon. The task was given to the University of Colorado. A world-famous professor of physics, Edward Condon, was chosen to serve as the chairman of this group. Documents and memos have revealed that the study was prejudiced against UFOs from the very beginning. Members of the panel discussed how to trick the public into believing that the committee was trying to be unbiased. Infighting and strife amongst the panel members resulted in the firing of panelists who were open to the idea of extraterrestrial visitation. Edward Condon had worked closely with the CIA, and CIA laboratories provided testing services for the group under another name. Final results of the study can be found in the infamous official Condon report. It was basically the same old government debunking material, a classic example of ignoring the good stuff and focusing on the bad stuff. Senator Barry Goldwater, who was also a lieutenant general in the United States Air Force Reserve, once said, "Flying saucers, unidentified flying objects, or whatever you want to call them, are real." Goldwater had heard rumors that a place called the Blue Room at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base was where UFO artifacts were being held. Senator Goldwater made repeated efforts to gain official access to the Blue Room. In letters sent to many inquirers across the country, Senator Goldwater also admitted on the record that his personal friend General Curtis LeMay, one of the most famous Air Force generals in U.S. history, threatened him with a court-martial if Goldwater ever spoke to him again about the Blue Room. General Douglas MacArthur was the Supreme Commander of Allied Forces in the South Pacific during World War II. He was also commander of all UN forces in the Korean conflict. According to author and UFO investigator John Keel, MacArthur started collecting information about UFOs during the Second World War when Foo Fighters and large mysterious radar blips were flitting around his forces in the Pacific. MacArthur believed in the existence of UFOs, and he commissioned a report on the matter that was over 20,000 pages long. During one of his last speeches to cadets at West Point, he said, "Gentlemen, the next war will not be an international war, but an intergalactic war." Other World War II-era figures also harbored an interest in UFOs. In July of 1952, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill sent a letter to his Secretary of State for Air and another advisor, Lord Cherwell, asking about UFOs. Both of his advisors replied with bogus information. They said that all UFOs have been identified and that U.S. authorities disregard UFO reports, when of course the British Air Staff had not identified 10% of the reported UFO sightings. U.S. intelligence and Air Force officials failed to identify 20% of their sightings in that year, and as early as 1947, studies had concluded that the phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious. Other World War II contemporaries of Churchill also were interested in the UFO matter. Just before the end of the war, Adolf Hitler even had his top scientists building objects that looked strangely like flying saucers. Modern historians have since wondered, where did the Luftwaffe get such interestingly shaped objects? Only time will tell.